discussing the general principles of the budget, which as normal or as usual, the National Assembly is in hurry to pass the budget so that the executive will start the implementation. And thank God what we witness in this administration is an improved implementation of the budget. You cannot take that away from this government in terms of releases. In fact, last year I think the budget implementation was almost like 100%. But this year's budget, which is growing, and it has gone up to 20.57 trillion, is it? 5.1. So my contribution basically is to draw the attention of my colleagues, and by extension, Nigerians, to the continuous rise in the recurrent expenditure and debt servicing. But that of debt servicing is even understandable, because if you borrow, you have to service the debt anyway. But when you borrow to spend on recurrent, and this money is going to less than 5% or even 1%, because if you put the total number of Nigerian workers or public servants, it's not up to 5% of Nigerians. And this budget is supposed to be for Nigerians. Right now, the recurrent expenditure is standing at about 43% by the presentation they have made. And what I draw, what you call a powerful presentation, is still what I want to call the attention of the media, because you are the voice of the people. I told my colleagues that the matter of concern is the recurrent expenditure of Nigeria. In 2018, that was when the government made a pronouncement that workers should no longer be employed, no new recruitment, isn't it?
Yes.
And why is recurrent expenditure? What is recurrent expenditure? Recurrent expenditure is the money you pay every year, but based on the government activities. The more workers you have, the more will be the recurrent expenditure. The less workers you have, the less should be the recurrent expenditure. Now, in Nigeria, from that 2018, no employment. After 2018, I think it was in 2020 that we witnessed the COVID, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, in 2020, in COVID, even I think up to now, the level 12 downward are working from home. And technology have improved work now. You don't have to go to the office. Most of them are working on Zoom. You exchange your notes and file and all that on the internet. The cost of running government should go down. But look at this. In 2018, the recurrent expenditure was 3.5 trillion. And I was very considerate of the fact that it was around that time that the government started implementing the minimum wage. But that was what raised the recurrent expenditure of the government to 3.5 trillion. But in 2019, instead of this to either go down or be stable, it went up to 4.7 trillion. In 2020, the recurrent expenditure still raised not only to in 2020, it was 4.8 trillion. Still, some billions over the 2019 figure. But, and we said that was the time we witnessed COVID, up to 2021, isn't it? But the expenditure in 2021, instead of it going down, it went up to 5.9 trillion. 5.9 trillion. And then in 2022, that is this year, the overhead recurrent expenditure, go and check it, is 6.9 trillion. And guess what? That is the biggest one. In 2023 now, in the 8.2 trillion. So, and what happens is when they bring the budget now, they say, oh, overhead is workers' salary, that you should not touch it. So we stayed away. We always stay away from it. But at this time, I said, my colleagues should look at this. I'm not saying that we should not expeditiously pass the budget. But what I'm even going to call for by way of motion is that this rise in recurrent expenditure should be investigated. You hear people taking 100 trillion, or is it billion? Well, and then you hear all this, the most surprising one is, the introduction of TSA, GIFMIS, and IPPS is supposed to control this cost. But instead, Nigerians. So I suspect we have more Yahoo people in the government than the ones you find in the hotels and the streets. If not, what justification do you have for the increase in this cost? So that was my contribution on the floor. And also, I want to state that I also called my attention to my colleagues that in this year's budget of 20.51 is the total amount of capital is 5 trillion. So what is what is the percentage of 5 trillion to 20.7? Is less than 30%. In a country where you are trying to service 200 million, you are only spending 25 or less than 30% on them. And the most surprising, if you look at, I think I have it here, it also is in the reverse. As I said, the recurrent expenditure is 8.2 trillion. The debt service is 6.6 trillion. Then the capital is 5 trillion. Reverse is supposed to be the case. That is to say, the capital is supposed to take the higher percentage share of the budget. But here you are. And I'm sure that the president is not really aware of all these things that are going. So what they do is that they bring these voluminous things and they say GDP is this, GGG is that, DBD, they just confuse them. And then you will sign it off. And then when it comes to the National Assembly here, they say, let us not say that this in West, we have to expeditiously pass the budget. In fact, as you eat, you are at the gallery. You could see the argument I had with the Senate President. I'm here to represent people. And this budget is very important. And you are saying, don't just talk 3 minutes. So, we are not yet serious. In fact, if it is going to anything worth doing, it should be on one. When the president did not have time or cannot even have time to look at the budget, ask questions, that responsibility falls squarely and constitutionally on the National Assembly. Now we are saying that we should pass the budget latest December. And then you have all this going on. And Nigerians don't see it. And Nigerians will pay for it. It's not only paying for it. What is more painful is that we have to borrow in order, they say, to provide these services. If we are to borrow to do infrastructural development, all these things that you are talking about, that the government, the argument is that we have to borrow to build infrastructure. If we are borrowing to put in for infrastructure, so fine and good. If you really have to borrow, then why don't you borrow from the workers? You manage, then we pay you later, during the rainy days. In fact, at one time, what do you call it? Odoji was paid to workers when we had money, isn't it? But we are going to borrow in order to service this debt. It is our responsibility to make sure that every kobo we spent in this year's budget is accounted for. And I think majority of my colleagues, as you can see, agreed with me because they were wondering, why is this man getting these figures? I just took my time to wonder, why are we spending more at the time that we are supposed to spend less? And when somebody was telling me that, when people retire, they pay pension. Pension is now what? Pension is what? Contributory. It's your money that you, after you leave work, you go and collect. So the government is not paying you anything. So the argument is, and as I said, my colleagues agree with me that we should actually take a look at holistically at why is the recurrent expenditure expanding. Somebody, because he didn't know, among my colleagues, said, no, it's the debt service. I said, no, I'm not talking about the debt service. Recurrent expenditure is 8.2 trillion, while debt service is 6.6. It's a different one. I'm not adding it up. In fact, what I'm even wondering is that this recurrent expenditure, that is non-debt, it's not inclusive of the personnel cost, which is about 4-something trillion again. Why should we be paying 4 trillion when the workers are numbers are going down? They are not doing promotion. No new, workers are not employed. So, well, that was my own take on the budget. And I finally, because I'm in charge of the army, and look at the funniest thing, we are in a war situation everywhere. We are saying that the challenge of insecurity should be addressed, which is very more important. But guess what? The capital budget of the Nigerian army again is only 32 billion. Are we serious? No. If we are not safe, how can we spend even? You can see what is going on around in our country. But as I accused you people last time, let me do it again. You people should be looking at these budgets critically. Like now, when you say you are spending so much on the army, is there any amount that is too much for you to be secured? I don't think so. But the most important thing, as I said, you could see now that the improved funding of the Nigerian army is yielding results, isn't it? We could see some improvement. And then why don't we secure the country first? So I already brought it to the attention of my colleagues that the capital budget of the Nigerian army is still grossly inadequate. Comparing with what they need in order to execute or to bring this issue of escalating insecurity to an end. Finally, I hope you will appreciate the Nigerian army now, at least for improving on the security situation. The Nigerian press is known of always being interested in negative stories. When the positive one is there, you don't emphasize on it. When somebody dies, you say, somebody died. But when they born somebody, you will say they born new person. How many people were born today? Only God knows. Anyway, if there is any question, yeah. I think I have answered your questions.
2 questions. Look at that order, please.